And a very good afternoon to those of you who are aware. It's afternoon. A very good night. A very good night to some of you, and a very good evening to most of you. Most of you joining us from Guyana, from the English-speaking Caribbean, from up in North America, the east coast of North America. And of course, those of you who are joining us from Europe, from England, good night. Good morning by now, because it is past 12 o'clock, just past 12 o'clock. All of you, a good night and good afternoon to those of you who join us from the West Coast. In California, it's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and in Arizona, it's now 4 o'clock. So it's good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from the West Coast of the United States of America. Good evening to you joining us from Canada, from New York, from Connecticut, the northeastern part of the United States. Good evening to all of you. All of you are joining us from South America, from French Guyana, from Suriname. Welcome to Politics 101. We come on here, of course, another mass killing in the United States of America. My God, we are living in a hell of a world. Another mass killing in the United States of America. Oh, wow. That's all I can say. I think 565 mass killings, so many killings per year. Sometimes we don't even hear about them. We don't even hear about them. We, of course, our prayers go out to the victims of this senseless violence. Good evening to you. There's now a speaker. The Republicans have managed to elect a speaker, as you know, so they can carry on the business there in the United States National Assembly. They call it the Congress there. But the jury's still out. Democracy on trial. Democracy on trial all over the world. Democracy on trial in Israel. Democracy on trial in the United States. Democracy on trial in Guyana. Good evening. Welcome to Politics 101. Those of you who join us from Antigua, a special welcome to you. There was a by-election in Antigua on Tuesday. A by-election in Antigua on Tuesday. One of the candidates at the election held early in this year decided to resign his seat in Parliament because it was being challenged. There was a very close result, very, very close result. And the loser, the member from the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party, that member filed a petition challenging the result. And the winner, the member from the UPP, the opposition UPP, decided that rather than wait on the petition to be heard, he decided he was going to resign and let there be a by-election. And he ran in the by-election again, and he won. He won by a much larger margin this time than at the general election. So the petition has now become null and void. So welcome to you in Antigua. I was on the radio there on Tuesday morning in Antigua, commenting on that race. I'm on in Antigua fairly regularly, as those of you Guyanese who live in Antigua, most of you know. I used to be on the big issues a lot on Observer Radio, and now I'm on morning, I think they call it morning wake up or wake up morning, something like that, but it's on Twin Island Radio that I'm usually on at least once a week. And it's always good to get out and do the politics in other parts of our Caribbean, keep myself active, because sometimes our own politics in Guyana stifle us, and we come to think that that's the only politics in the world, forgetting that we are part of a larger region and a larger world. And thank God for giving me the opportunity to speak on and to study and to comment on politics in other parts of our Caribbean. I do a program every second Saturday of the month on Baltimore Radio, WEEA 88.9 FM in Baltimore, a program on the second Saturday of every month called The Political Hour with Dr. David Hinds. I've been doing that program now for 26 years. 26 years. 26 years I've been doing that program. Every second Saturday, The Political Hour with Dr. David Hinds. And on that program, I take a look at politics in the Caribbean for the preceding month. So, one gets the opportunity to follow politics in Trinidad and Grenada and Antigua and Barbados. And, the Caribbean is an interesting place and a difficult place to study. Difficult because you're studying, almost 30 countries. There are, 36 countries in our Caribbean. That's the wider Caribbean region. Of course, I pay attention to the English-speaking Caribbean, but I also, that includes Haiti and Suriname, and so although they're not English-speaking, they're part of CARICOM. And you, in effect, have to study the politics of each country. It means that you have to keep up with the news, read the newspapers of those countries. And so there is sometimes not enough time in the day to do all of that. But that's one of the challenges of studying our Caribbean, those of us who do that. So welcome, and welcome to the people of Antigua. As you know, the last election brought the parties very close. 17 seats in the parliament. It's now 9-8, 9 in favor of the government, 8 on the other side. And of course, the 8 on the other side, one is from Barbuda, and one is an independent, used to be a member of the Antigua Labour Party, Asset Michael. He fell out with them and ran in a stronghold and won. So really it's 9-6 with one seat from a Barbudan party and one independent. Interesting politics there in Antigua and Barbuda. Welcome to all of you. Welcome. Good evening. Good evening to you, Esther, Marla, Alicock. Dennis Book, of course, is here. Mr. Ben, Thomasina. Well, I don't know if it's a Mr. or a Miss. It looks like it's Miss Susan London. Good evening. Good evening to Mr. De Flormont, Kenneth De Flormont. I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. De Flormont when we were there in Washington for the Washington conference. He came to the meet and greet, and we got a chance to talk. I, of course, knew him and knew his family, and so it was good to catch up with him. How about you people there in Washington, D.C., Maryland area? Special good evening. Special good evening to you. It's, like I said, it's an area, a place where I lived continuously. I lived continuously for 12 years until I moved to the West Coast of the United States of America. As I said, over and over, that's where my people are. That's where my siblings and wider family are. And so I get back there as often as I can. I still regard that Washington, D.C., Maryland area as my United States home. I've never really embraced Arizona in the same way as I embrace Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, tri-state area. Welcome to Politics 101. If you're listening, Rebecca, good evening. Good evening to you and your sisters and families Friday night. I know it's going to be a very, very busy night down there in Silver Spring. Rebecca and her sisters, the Bavagins from Bedford Wacton, they were so good to us when we were in Washington, D.C. for the conference. We were at their restaurant one night, a get-together there, and then they hosted the meet and greet for the WPA, the Bavagins. Rebecca, who lived in Buxton because their cousin is brother UC Guyana, and Rebecca lived in Buxton, actually, just down the road from us. Very, very good evening to that family, the Bavagins family, and all those families there. The one young lady whose name escapes me now, she and her husband, they came out to the meet and greet, and she remembered me from a program that I did and still do in Washington, D.C. area, a television program called Carib Nation. And I started to do Carib Nation in 1995. So what? It's 28 years now. And even though I have moved now, I still, whenever I'm in the area or now with the technology, I do a program here and there. But people like Paul Tennessee and Darius Dean, they're on and they keep the program going because it's still there. And you can now get it on YouTube, Carib Nation. I had the pleasure of interviewing so many people. And that young lady, if you're listening, you and your wonderful husband, good evening to you, because she said she first heard me years and years ago on Carib Nation talking about Walter Rodney. She hadn't heard about Walter Rodney, and it was there, and she has been following me since then. It's really so nice to talk to people in person and to hear how much you affect them in a positive way, because you do your thing because you have to do your thing, and you don't know. And with this, in this the age of technology, you're touching people, and every time you touch somebody, somebody's touching you. And it's good to know that there are people out there. It makes you want to wake up every morning and to continue this struggle that has to do with our own country in the first instance, and then other countries. My sister Donette Booker, who's joining us from out there in Pennsylvania. Donette, my dear sister, the Donette and Denise. Denise is the popular one of the two, but Donette is my sister. Managed to run into Donette during the summer when one of her relatives died, her husband, and she was there for the funeral. We didn't get to spend as much time as we usually would, because Donette is one of my lineman partner, lineman crew. We have a crew when I'm in the country. We usually hang out, and some of my friends at home get very jealous because they say certain people, only when the doctor is in town, they come to hang out and so on. So Donette is one of the crew. Oh, but my brother Ori Newton, Turkey Bumbo. How are you doing, my brother? Really, Bumbo is a trooper. Turkey is a trooper. He's in Buxton all the time, and you don't know, he lives somewhere else. He sleeps somewhere else, but you would think that he lives in Buxton. He's there all the time, every single day. Really, your neighbor Stringberry there, as we say, one of my good friends, and we hang out all the time. And he's a dead PNC, and people. Turkey is a PNC, he's an Aubrey Norton man. But you would think that he's a WPA man because we're very close and we hang out, and we used to be adversaries in our young days. In those days, Buxton was controlled by well, I don't like to use the word control, but the two parties, the PNC and the WPA, were quite influential in Buxton in the 1970s. Well, you all know that during those days we were hot on each other. And, you know, the PNC had their camp at the front side of the village, and we, WPA, operated from the back damn side of the village, and we had intense rivalry. But one of the things about village life is that we remain friends throughout that. And Turkey is still a dead PNC man. He's a dead Norton man. But we moved together in recent times. In fact, people in the village, why you there with Turkey and Bumba? You know he's a PNC and so on. And we have good fun in the village over that. Interesting place, the village. The village is an interesting place. And when I talk about the village, I'm not leaving out the towns, because I consider places like Tiger Bay to be a village in itself, or Albai's Tongue, although they're part of the tongue, that they are essentially villages. Kitty used to be a village in itself, and I consider those places to be still villages. Good evening to all of you. Good evening, all of you. Welcome on a Friday night. Friday night, you stretch out, you know, because it's payday on Friday in the old days, and you're gone out in the village, and the glass case and them start to come out since Friday night. You go up the line side in the village, and you're gone by Baby Jarvis there, and you see that glass case. If you see food in there, the glass case is sweat, as we used to say, you know, from the heat from the food and so on. Friday night was also a special night leading in to Saturday, and things have changed a little bit now, because it's not the same. Things change. But welcome to all of you. Please share the link. Tonight we want to talk about three issues. One, we want to talk about that meeting between Aubrey Norton and his team and the PPP. And the PPP is carrying on. Oh, what a wonderful chap Aubrey Norton is. And so on. And they're now going to go to Parliament, and they're going to have a debate, and so on. I want to weigh in on that tonight. And did you all notice that Mr. Gosai, the man who it is alleged made an arrangement with Exxon to reduce that bill that was found by the audit of $214 million, to reduce it to $3 million. So whereas Exxon had overbilled us for $214 million, it's now down to $3 million. And they say it's Mr. Gosai, a man working in the ministry, who did it. And we learned today that Mr. Gosai has lost 2 weeks' pay, and he has been given a warning. The punishment for giving away $211 million to Exxon is a loss of 2 weeks of pay and a warning. Only in Guyana, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about that. And then, did you all notice that there's a fact-finding mission in Guyana led by some business people and some former state representatives? We had thought it was some state representatives from New York. It's not. It's another group of Americans. A fact-finding in Guyana. We're going to be talking about that also. But we want to start with this thing. All of a sudden, national unity. Oh, the public, the private sector commission, and all of them congratulating the president and Mr. Norton for meeting, and so on. National unity. And they're advising Norton, the thing that you have to do is don't worry with the extremists. Come in and support the government. That's how they put it. Support the government on the issue of Venezuela. On the issue of Venezuela. National unity. National unity. All right. We're going to talk about it. Let's do this and give you a chance to share the link. And then we're going to talk a little bit more. Share the link. Share the link.
After the election, I went to London, and if you hear how much question I get from Trinidadians, Chucky, your new government of the UNC, I hear that they intend national unity. If you see how them Londoners jumping and praising Panday, you need nobody in the past wouldn't do that, they say. I had to tell them, wait, it's true, and they preach unity. But the idea, my friend, didn't originate with me. No, siree. I so spectacular was preaching unity. When we brought in Rex West and Trooper T and Ricky, Kyson Nelson, he made the same plea. When he sang all of we is one family. When the Lord Shorty paid tribute to Indrani, and Tunda Popo was singing Nana and Nani. All these songs proved naturally that there's a going T&T. Kysonians preach national unity. Yeah. You forget how much money man pay to pay, let me say family. So Panday and start national unity. Alive. Oh, like. I told them Londoners that Mr. Panday has my congratulations for the part he played as a politician. He saw the need for unity in the nation that he chose to lead. I told them Londoners, we want unity in the region, not only in our land, but throughout the Caribbean. That's why when they talk about invasion, I just turn red. Them Asians could only invade we when we and crocodile. Not said when we see Batman spinning in the oval, and white man Jeffrey Stallmeyer was starting unity. When them cricketers took a pause for tea, Africans in the oval eating roti and talcary. And look how we Trinidad and the Chinese gave way. And Brian Whiteton come up Manning and them Hispanic. Whiteton's action show clearly that some politicians already practicing this national unity. Yeah. You forgot Eric Williams Marie. Daily looks and the Chinese. So Pande is that national unity. Oh, like you, I told them Londoners that in my country you'll find Chinese children calling African study. It have some Chinese men making roast steak better than me. It have African women who could teach Indian to make roti. I told them unity start with Butler and Cipriani. When Butler brought Stephen Maharaj and Rienzi in his party. And when the police were looking for Butler in 1940. Is a Chinese hiding in an Indian house in Caroni. Unity. When I see Keith Shepherd and Mr. Rapisha editing the Mirror newspaper together, and when I see black rastas living in Billy City and planting their okra, their bygone and bachi, and when I see Indians living in Billy City, we took like children eating roast bacon, hanging Christmas tree, and Syrians and Chinese today eating kalaloo on a Sunday. Then I know unity has come to stay. Yeah. Roy marry a white lady, turn around and marry a Dulahini. That's what I call national unity. Alive. Oh, like you that I told them Londoners that in any country it's the culture bearers who does bring unity. Men like Mighty Trini, the Calypsonian, even the young Big Shiny and John Agitation. When an African take half the Indian culture, or Assyrian or Chinese to the crossover, what they are doing, my friend, is pulling races together. Like Cameo the Indian dancer or Miss Dennis Plummer. You see, when that man from the south brought in his cavaliers in town, Indian like peace joined in the panorama. And when Jim Samaru pioneered his steel band, he proved that pan belongs to East Indian just as African. But when Mr. Pandeban told the era of the Guardian, some say that was racism and discrimination. But we are so united that right now, man, look Pande and John Bandera from the Guardian, both of them clapping jockey in the grandstand. You forget it's me, Chalky, who sang Ram Kapalani. So Pande is that national unity is all a we.
Yes, Dr. Hollis, Liverpool, they chalked us. They chalked us. National unity. You see the writing in the paper every day. Look at Ali won Guyana and so on. Chalky say, it's not Ali who start national unity. National unity is not by politicians. National unity is by the people. By the people. Dr. Hollis, Liverpool, they chalked us the quintessential political Calypsonian, the man who gave us 3 blind mice among great calypsos. And he, of course, is the 8-time winner, 8 times, of the national monarchy in Trinidad, the most by any Calypsonians there, waning there on national unity. Because you, as I said, you read in the newspaper every day. Every day, Ali is bringing this country together. Ali can't even bring his party together. He'll bring country together. Any country coming together, national unity is among the people, not politicians, not politicians. A good evening to all of you. So, Brother Aubrey Norton accepted an invitation to be briefed by the president of Guyana on the Venezuelan issue. And Norton turned up with his team that included leader of the AFC and other members of his parliamentary group. And he walked with some technicians. I think people like Keith Austin was there. And they went to the briefing. And once the briefing was over, the government went heels over head talking about national unity, that this is what Norton should have been doing all the time, and so on and so forth. My initial response was that I support Norton going to the meeting. Some people argue that Norton should have played hardball. Since you didn't want to meet, they didn't want to meet on other substantive issues, but on Venezuela they want to meet. The president says he's not meeting with Norton because Norton didn't shake his hand. The president says he's going to go into opposition control communities and they're going to bypass the representatives and go straight to the people. But on this issue of Venezuela, he chose to meet with Norton. And understandably, many of Norton's supporters are saying, well, Norton should play hardball. Some say he shouldn't meet with them. Some say when he met with them, he should say, before we can have a joint statement, let's talk about other issues that affect my supporters. I support Norton meeting, because I think that sometimes our people need a little break. You know, the fatigue of politics every day can begin to have a negative effect on people. And so it's good to see the two leaders meeting. But beyond that, I do not put much store on it, because I know the PPP. They're going to use it for the photo op. They're going to use it to show that Norton is supporting them. You see? The opposition is supporting the government, not the PPP and the PNC coming together to stand against Venezuela. That's not how they're framing it. They're framing it that the opposition is supporting the government. I plan to have Mr. Norton on this program to ask him whether he was there to support the government. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Norton was there to support Guyana against Venezuela. And he was joining with the other party to stand up for Guyana. He wasn't there to support the government or support the PPP. You see, this is when you're dealing with people who have this mentality of domination. Even when you give them an opportunity to speak in a sane way, they bring the domination. I remember after the 1997-98 impasse and the Ord-Munster Accord that mandated that the two parties must meet in constructive discourse. Mr. Luncheon said although the two sides were meeting, they were not meeting as equals. So Luncheon said that. And while the PPP is not using that language today, the fact that they're saying Norton and the government, Norton and the opposition, were there to support the government. And I think sometimes our inexperienced politicians, I saw a letter in today's paper, seem to be echoing that same language. And I put it down to inexperience. The opposition is not there to support the government. The opposition is there to stand with the government in support of Guyana's territorial integrity. The PPP is saying the opposition was there to support the government. And like I said, some opposition members are using that language, as I put it down to inexperience. So the PPP is celebrating. And now they're telling Norton, you have to distance yourself from the extremists. You see, what they want is to tie the opposition down on issues that are inconsequential to the core issues in our country. Now, Venezuela is not an inconsequential issue. Venezuela is a very, very important issue. But the Venezuela border issue has nothing to do with people's houses that were demolished in Mocha, Arcadia. The Venezuela border issues has nothing to do with the killing of Boston and Bacchus and the Henry boys. The Venezuela border issues has nothing to do with spitting in the face of the young constable. The Venezuela border issue has nothing to do with the jailing of opposition leaders and charging them and pulling them before the courts. The Venezuela border issue has nothing to do with the government's refusal, the PPP's refusal, to let the Public Accounts Committee meet and peruse government spending. The Venezuela border issue has nothing to do with the attempt to push the people of Plaisance off the line top. The Venezuela border issue has nothing to do with removing those women from in front of the hospital selling. And so, while the Venezuela issue is consequential, it has nothing to do with the contestation between the government and its own people. The Venezuela border issue has nothing to do with those mainly Indian sugar workers in Berbice who were stripped by the police because they were calling for severance pay from Gaisuku. The Venezuela border issues has nothing to do with the government taking away people's private lands to build big projects and not wanting to compensate them. First it was Steve Surridge land. And now we see here Mr. Stuart Hughes. Land that was owned by the Hughes family since 1844, we are told. The government now want to give them 2.5 million or whatever little pittance. And they're saying no. The matter is now in court. Every day, the government of Guyana is violating human rights in Guyana. He doesn't want to meet with Norton on those issues because those issues have direct political consequences. The Venezuela border issue is important, but the consequences are not direct, they are indirect. So the government feels comfortable sitting down with Mr. Norton and the opposition to talk about Venezuela. Every time the opposition seeks to get the National Assembly to debate issues of national concern, the Speaker disallows them. But now the Speaker is going to allow a motion to debate Venezuela, the Venezuela border issue. The Venezuela border issue is important. I have argued on this program that there's three important issues that we face as a country. One, the issue of balancing the competing demands of various groups in the society for the resources that are coming in. Managing those demands. The government has an F- on that. The other important issue is taking into consideration geopolitics. That the neighborhood in which we live is a theater of geopolitics. Give more oil resource, give more proximity to Venezuela. The fact that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves, we have the largest oil find. America is now altering, adjusting its relationship to Venezuela. It had put sanctions on Venezuela. It's now easing those sanctions because Venezuela has what the America wants. America put sanctions on some of the contestants in our election. I don't know if they have lifted those sanctions. But America has an interest in Guyana because of our oil find and what that means for America. And so the way in which our politics are wrapped up geopolitically is the second big issue for us as Guyanese. And the third big issue, of course, is Venezuela. Any country that is demanding 2/3 of your territory is a clear and present and continuing danger. So I am agreeing that Venezuela is important and that our leaders should constantly be talking about Venezuela. But that should not be the substitute for dealing with the first big issue, and that is balancing the competing demands of the various groups. If Norton is good enough to talk about Venezuela without a handshake, he should be good enough to talk about MOCA, to talk about naming a substantive chief justice and chancellor without a handshake. Those are the demands that we ought to be making, and we ought to be telling Mr. Norton that. I support Mr. Norton meeting on Venezuela. You can't not meet when the territorial integrity of our country is being challenged. But you must not stop there, because you have a government that is shameless. And so therefore, we have to call them out. And just as how they're going to debate Venezuela in the National Assembly, they must debate other issues. And the opposition has to be careful not to get sucked in. The Private Sector Commission, which is hailing the coming together, they were part of regime change. One of the leaders of the Private Sector Commission said publicly that he was in touch with the State Department during the elections. And that had Mr. Granger not thrown in the towel, that the Americans were going to put further sanctions on the relatives of PNC leaders in the United States of America. He said that publicly. He didn't hide. The Private Sector Commission was part of regime change. And you must not encourage the government to behave in a reckless way when it comes to people's lives and livelihood in Guyana. But when the government needs help on an issue such as the border issue, you want the opposition to give them help. What are the realities of our Guyana? In our ethnically divided society, it is the army that would be called upon to protect our borders. And the majority of the people in the army are African Guyanese. They're jailed or Ogunse for saying so. But that is the reality. You beat up on the leaders of the African Guyanese people. You exclude them. You don't pay them well. You manipulate the leadership and turn the leadership of the army against their own people. But it is that same army, the members of that same army, who will have to defend Guyana. You shoot down young African men for any little thing. You criminalize them and then shoot them down. But they are the ones who you're going to call upon to pick up guns to defend our country. Our country, Guyana, is ethnically divided. It's divided not just politically, in terms of where people work. East Indians are predominantly sugar workers. The private sector is predominantly Portuguese and East Indians. The public service, the police, the army, nurses, teachers, they're predominantly African. Those are the facts of history. History has brought us to this point. And we cannot have one group good enough to pick up guns and fight for us, but are not good enough to own businesses and to own oil blocks. I notice a group of young black women have bid, and they've won a bid for an oil block. So far, so good. Because that is what we have been calling for, to diversify the ownership of oil blocks. But don't let us get fooled yet. They've won the bid. They now have to raise the money. I mean, it's billions of dollars to run an oil block. So they want us to get excited because these women have won a bid. But we are sensible enough to know that is just the beginning of the process. And I'm saying we must respect our reality. The PPP must tell its supporters that African people are not just criminals. African people have to defend this country. The other night I hear my brother Beto Ramarak talking feelingly about his father, who worked so hard, who got injured but continued to work and build a house for his family. But he was saying so within the context of comparing East Indians to Africans, implying that African Guyanese men didn't do the same thing, didn't work hard on the plantation. What he failed to say is when his father got injured, who were the nurses at the clinic that took care of his father? Who were the teachers who taught his father's 9 children? Who were the soldiers that kept the Venezuelans and Surinamese out? He's not saying that. He talks about Mr. Prashad, who rose up from nothing and built Prashad Nagar. But he's not saying long before Mr. Prashad built Prashad Nagar, African people built scores and scores of villages. He said Mr. Prashad didn't get a handout, but he didn't say that African people came out of slavery, didn't beg for a handout, and they bought lands and created villages. And when David Hines and others point these things out, they say we are racist. We have to be clear about history when we are speaking. You can't only want Norton to sit down with you when it comes to defending our borders. Norton must be good to sit down with you on other issues. I support Mr. Norton going to meet with the president. I think he did the right thing. But the government, the president and his government are trying to use Mr. Norton. And we should not allow that to happen. They say that some of us are the extremes. We are influencing Norton. The Guyana Times this morning said that Norton must loose himself, untie himself from the racial tail that is wagging the multiracial dog. So they say Norton is multiracial, and the PNC is multiracial, and the rest of us are racial. and Norton must disassociate himself from us. They're asking Norton to disassociate himself from his support base in exchange for sitting down at a meeting with Irfan Ali and Jack Dew. So we have to be very clear. I ask you all to support Mr. Norton. Do not make him feel as though he did something wrong by going to that meeting. He did nothing wrong. He did what any responsible leader should do. But we have to make it very clear that we are not going to allow the PPP to manipulate Norton. Constructive engagement must come from both sides. Norton will have to give up something, and the government will have to give up something. In fact, the government should give up more because it is the government. If we are good to defend the borders, we must be good to have businesses. If we are good to sit down and talk about the border without a handshake, we must be good to sit down and talk about discrimination against supporters of the opposition without a handshake. Which brings me to the fact-finding mission that is there. Thank God. In the press release, according to the Stabrook News today, the fact-finding mission said that its visit was influenced by presentations made in Washington at the Washington conference by members of parliament, and it named 4 parliamentarians. But the key thing there is they're saying it is the Washington conference that influenced our presence in Guyana. This is not David Hinds. This is the fact-finding mission itself. Another victory for the Washington conference. Another victory for the Washington conference. Less than a month later, because of the Washington conference, there's a fact-finding mission to Guyana. It's in the Stabrook News. Today, Stabrook News. Today, Stabrook News. It is not David Hinds who is saying that. It is the fact-finding mission itself. They are saying that. So, there is victory in motion because of the Washington conference. Because of the Washington conference. Because of the Washington conference. And we have to recognize that. We have to recognize when we are winning victories. And we have to be able to say it so that the government does not control the narrative. The government must not, the PPP must not be allowed to control the narrative. According to the release, this is Stabrook News, according to the release, the decision to visit Guyana was prompted by presentation by members of parliament, Roysdale Ford, David Patterson, Don Hastings Williams, and Catherine Hughes at the Washington Diaspora Conference, where accusations were outlined by the leadership of a large section of the Guyanese populace. This in addition to a public missive issued by Ford, a shadow member of legal affairs, which was published in the Kaichor News, as well as calls made by way of a formal request for a fact-finding mission to assess allegations of discrimination, marginalization, and displacement. These are the words of the members of the fact-finding mission. These are the words of the members of the fact-finding mission. Now, this is the same conference that the PPP said the people ask us for evidence. Here the people are coming because they said they got the evidence. And they're coming as a result of the evidence to see whether the evidence we give them is true or not. The PPP would have us believe that we went there and didn't give evidence. Here are Americans who are saying they got the evidence from the opposition and they're here to see whether what we tell them is true or not. You hear a lie? The PPP tried to lie to us, and now the truth is coming out. Let there be more fact-finding missions. Because the situation in our country is serious. When we in Coffee 250, when we said that we have an emerging apartheid state operating in Guyana, we were signaling the warning, let us not wait until we get to the point of South Africa or Gaza and the West Bank. Let us not wait until we get there. We sounded the warning. And that is why they got jittery. And thank God, give thanks to Coffee 250 for putting it out there. Give thanks to Rickford Burke for assembling us in Washington. And we are reaping the rewards. We are reaping the rewards of that clarion call by Coffee 250. We are reaping the rewards of Rickford Burke bringing us together. We are reaping the rewards of ITPADG, which went up to the United Nations and told that body, provided the evidence of discrimination in Guyana. And we are going to be talking about ITPADG's action in the coming weeks. Stay tuned. Give thanks to ITPADG. Give thanks to Rickford Burke. Give thanks to Coffee 250. Give thanks to Brother Nigel Hughes for taking his own cash money and financing research and providing empirical evidence of discrimination in government policy. Give thanks. Give thanks. Give thanks to all of us who stuck to our task. Give thanks. Discrimination of Africans, discrimination of East Indians or Amerindians, or any ethnic group has no place in Guyana. And we must not let the PPP get away by trying to hoodwink us. They're angry because we have continued day after day. Give thanks to the opposition for coming out of the meeting with Exxon and telling the country that the government had reached an agreement with Exxon to reduce liability from $214 million to $3 million. We would not have known of that deal. And when the deal came out in the open, they put the blame on a junior functionary, Mr. Gosai, as if Mr. Gosai would negotiate $211 million without somebody higher up telling him what to do. Now GRA has come out and said it is sticking to $214 million. Now Jack Doe is saying if Exxon don't want to pay up, they're going to go to arbitration. That would have never occurred had the opposition not come out and expose what they heard in the meeting with Exxon. Sisters and brothers, when our leaders are working for us, we must give thanks. When they're messing up, we must say they're messing up. So what did they do? They take away 2 weeks' pay from Mr. Gosai and give him a warning. What they did is they charged Mr. Gosai under public service rules. Now, public service rules are just what it is. And I doubt whether Mr. Gosai is a traditional public servant. He may be a contract worker. He's not your traditional public servant. So when it suits them, they treat the Gosais of this world as separate from the public service. But now it suits them. They want to give him a slap on the wrist. They place him as a public servant and take away two weeks' pay and give him a warning. If Mr. Gosai commits such an offense, he defied the president, the vice president, the minister, and took it upon himself to negotiate with a foreign company to negotiate $211 million on his own. That is tantamount to treason. But we know that Mr. Gosai did not negotiate that thing on his own. So he has not committed treason. But if the leaders are saying they knew nothing, then he has committed treason. If they're saying they knew, then he didn't commit treason. And give him the reprimand that they give to Gosai. They're admitting Gosai was not a lone wolf. He was not acting on his own. If he was acting on his own, at a minimum, he should have been fired. If he was not acting on his own, then he should not be fired. And he's not fired, which means he was not acting on his own. He's been used as a scapegoat. The Guyanese public only knew what was happening when the opposition met with Exxon, came out of that meeting, and shined that they're giving away $211 million. I am not a money expert, but if you're going to give away $211 million to Exxon, what are you getting in return? That's my question. If you are willing to give away $211 million to Exxon, what are you getting in return? Are you getting campaign funds in return? Are you getting a commitment from Exxon to help in keeping you in government after the next election? I am not charging any individual with getting a kickback from Exxon. I don't know that, and I'm not going to make that speculation. What I am speculating is if you're giving away $211 million to Exxon, you have to have something in return, as the song said, something of value. That whole Guyanese song. My Guyanese song people, you all tell me, is who sings something of value? I get old now, I don't remember the name so good. There must be something of value. Is that something of value a commitment to campaign funds? Is that commitment a commitment to help to keep you in power after elections? I don't know. I am speculating. But you don't give away $211 million to a company for nothing. We are up against a rogue government. A rogue government. So let us welcome the fact-finding mission. Let us urge our organizations to meet with the mission. I understand they met with the government today. So far, so good. Make sure our organizations meet with them. This nonsense that we went up to Washington without evidence. Evidence. The fact-finding mission will gather their evidence. They will gather their evidence. We are moving on and we are winning. We are making the government do things it does not want to do. It didn't want us to know that they give away $211 million. We now know. They have reprimanded Mr. Gosai, although it's a touch on his wrist. We made them do it. It's not Mr. Gosai who need a touch on his wrist. It is those who are functionally in charge of Mr. Gosai who should be reprimanded. We are making them do things that they do not want to do. We support Aubrey Norton and the opposition meeting with the government on Venezuela. We are at one with whoever else wants to stand up for Guyana against Venezuela. We're at one. But Venezuela is not our only clear and present danger. We have other clear and present dangers every day in Guyana, and they are as important as Venezuela. Let them not tie Aubrey Norton and his team down on Venezuela and turn their eyes away from the prize, the other prize. Turn their eyes away from human rights violation. Let us keep the pressure on our leaders that they do not become sucked in with the limelight of going to meetings with the government. Let us empower them to empower themselves. Let us remind them so that they can remind the government that it's people of predominantly one ethnic group who's defending Guyana. My friends, Ravi Dev and others, they like to quote George Lamin, who said that Indians fed us in the Caribbean. But I like them to quote me as saying Africans have defended our territorial integrity before independence and after independence. All ethnic groups play an important part. Indians went into agriculture, and yes, they fed us. Africans defend us. Africans teach us. Africans nurse us. Amerindians preserve our environment in the interior. We have all made contributions to Guyana. African people did not ask to go into the public service and the police and the army. We were forced into those professions. But we must recognize that service in those professions are equally important to service in other professions. The soldier is as important to our political economy as the sugar worker. And the public servant is as important to the running of our country as the rice farmer. And the police is as important as the goldsmith. And those teachers who are mainly female, the nurses who are mainly female of African descent, are as important as the lawyers of another ethnic group or the accountants of another ethnic group. There is dignity in all labor. Dignity in all labor. Venezuela is not the sum total of our problems. It is a big problem. But government must not only work for Venezuela and doesn't work for Mocha. Government must work for Venezuela and Mocha. Give thanks to our leaders, but protect our leaders from manipulation by a PPP that has no intention, at least in the foreseeable future, of an egalitarian and equitable Guyana. If we are going to get there, we have to push. We have to push them there. I love you all. As usual, give thanks.